Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. I'm with you again, Alan Miller. And we were just talking with our guest, who is a return guest, over a number of years. But as you looked at our opening, you saw what this gentleman has accomplished. We have a governor, we have U.S. senators, we have Ken Martin, who's the leader of the Minnesota DFL, and who just endured an election in which we re-elected all those people.
Yeah, you know, it's quite remarkable when you think about it. We set out in this election cycle a couple years ago with 5 goals. One was to re-elect Senator Franken. 2 was to re-elect Governor Dayton. 3 was to keep all of our constitutional offices, including what would be an open Secretary of State's race. 4 was to keep our congressional delegation, and 5 was to keep the Minnesota House. In the context of what happened around this country, unfortunately this was one of the worst midterm elections for Democrats since the 1920s. It's quite remarkable that we were actually able to keep 4 out of those 5 goals that we just mentioned. The DFL had a really great election year here in Minnesota this year, and of course it couldn't have been possible without all of the great candidates we had at the top of the tickets, Governor Dayton, of course, and Senator Franken, who ran spectacular campaigns.
Senator Franken, who won by 300 votes and won in a landslide this time.
Yeah, 312 votes in 2008, and won by over 10% of the, with a 10% margin this last cycle here just a short month ago. You know, look, I think Senator Franken ran a fantastic campaign. And you know, the difference between him and maybe some of his colleagues around the country who didn't fare quite as well is that I think for both Governor Dayton and Senator Franken, they both stood up and they were proud of what they accomplished. They didn't run away from their record. They didn't run away from the president. They stood proud with not only their records of accomplishment, but also stood up as proud progressives. And I think that's a lesson for a lot of people to learn in this last election. I think when you think about Minnesota politics, here in this state we've elected people like Jesse Ventura and Paul Wellstone and Michelle Bachmann, and in some ways you could say the 3 of them couldn't be any more disparate in their political ideology. But the one thing that's a common thread between the 3 of them is that I think all 3 of them are driven by, and were driven by, their core set of convictions. They were very genuine, they were very authentic, and I think here in Minnesota that's what people expect in their politicians. That's what they thirst for, is genuineness and authenticity. And we unfortunately don't see that a lot anymore on the national scene. But here in Minnesota, I think one of the reasons Governor Dayton and Senator Franken did so well is because they were authentic and genuine.
Well, Franken also worked extremely hard. He went all over the state. But he also accomplished things for the people of the state as well as for the country. And I think people who were skeptical of Al Franken as a comedian and a comedy writer realized that that was another stage of his life. And the Al Franken who has performed so admirably in the last 6 years has been an entirely different individual who really, really dedicated himself to his job and did just a tremendous job.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think there was some skepticism, not just amongst Republicans, independents, but certainly some Democrats who didn't know what to expect out of Al Franken in the U.S. Senate. However, very quickly it became apparent that Senator Franken was going to put his nose to the grindstone and do the tough work of actually legislating. And instead of hitting the national circuit and trying to play to his celebrity and expand his profile, Senator Franken was back here every single weekend and doing the tough work in Washington to make sure that Minnesota's voices were heard and so many important issues over the last 6 years. So, his hard work and his passion and his commitment to Minnesota was really what delivered him this great election result last November.
So let's go back a few years. Ken Martin is elected as the chair of the DFL. Ken Martin walks in and takes a pretty battered party, a party that got kicked around in elections, a party that really had financial, if not troubles, certainly no cushion to fall back on. And here Ken Martin just announced, and admirably so for his third term as leader of the Minnesota DFL. Take us a little bit through the transition there from then till now.
Well, I'm proud of what we've been able to do the last 4 years. And as you mentioned, coming out of the 2010 midterm elections, which were a very bruising election cycle for Minnesota DFLers. We lost pretty much across the board. We lost a very close congressional race in the 8th District. We lost a 38-year majority in the state Senate, a veto-proof majority in the state House, and just barely held on to the governor's race here in Minnesota. And as you mentioned, the party coming out of that election cycle was in one of its worst positions financially and organizationally it's ever been in. And so, over the last 4 years, we've really been able to build the party back up into being not only the center of gravity for helping to drive political and electoral strategy here in the DFL in this state, and to bring all of our partners and allies and candidates and campaigns together in a meaningful way to put together our strategy, but also to make sure that the party is adding value and making sure that we are contributing to the political discourse in this state, and also helping our candidates instead of just being marginalized and on the sidelines. I think the party's come a long ways, and it's a testament to, again, not just the work of the staff at the party headquarters, but so many party leaders and activists around the state who, day in, day out, work tirelessly to advance the cause of the DFL. As I've said before, we're certainly here to win elections, but this is also about something bigger. And for many of the activists who toil away every single day with little to no recognition, this is really about how we elect Democrats to office to make a difference in people's lives. And I've often said that that's what politics is about. It's about improving people's lives, and it's for us, we've been able to make a difference in that regard too. There's been a lot of great public policy that's been instituted here in Minnesota over the last several years, thanks to good DFL majorities and DFL elected officials who actually care.
And the people, I think, showed that they really appreciated that with the results of this last election. Now, true, you did lose the House, and we have new leadership in the House. And speaking of that, Kurt Dowd, who's now going to be leading the Republicans, started off at least with a far more reasonable disposition than some of the people that we have heard in the past. Much the same as Obama faced people who said, I will never work with him. My job is to see that he's not reelected. Oh, thank you, Mitch McConnell, and things like that. Dowd said, I plan to be a conciliator. I plan to talk to the other side. We're going to have things to work out. Not everybody is going to get everything they want, but he sounded conciliatory in that regard.
Well, obviously actions speak louder than words, and we stand here a couple weeks before the start of the legislative session, and the real big question mark for people is whether or not Kurt Daudt will actually be able to lead his caucus, or whether his caucus will be leading him. And I take Speaker designate Daudt at his word that he wants to find common ground, he wants to compromise, he wants to govern in the best interest of Minnesotans. And so I'm not going to prejudge him here, but I will say that a number of his colleagues in the Minnesota House, some of the more recently elected members, and frankly some of the holdovers, represent an ideology that is pretty far to the right. And I don't think, based on comments I've heard since the election, that the Republican caucus itself is going to be interested in finding that common ground that their soon-to-be elected speaker desires. The reality is Kurt Daudt is going to be held captive by, unfortunately, by a very far-right House caucus that has no interest in governing, no interest in working with the DFLers to advance the cause of Minnesotans, and frankly, what we've seen already is just an interest in trying to score political points and basically run up the political score.
And you would think these people recognize on a national level how ineffective that is. That we have a Congress that has an 11% approval record, that we have John Boehner, and we have Mitch McConnell, and their sole purpose has been to take away from Obama. Not that I'm happy with everything that Obama has done, although in the last several weeks, Obama has acted like the president I hoped he would be 6 years ago, and has taken some really courageous steps to the point that they're hysterical. You would hope that the people locally would recognize that that's no way to govern. Ideology goes just so far. The will of the people and the needs of the people are much more important. Look what we have accomplished in this state under Governor Dayton.
Right.
I mean, we just heard today that the unemployment rate in this state is 3.87. I think it's the lowest in the country, including the oil fields of North Dakota.
Right.
And that's an incredible thing.
Yeah,
when they were up around 8% or 9%.
Well, I think Minnesota can be a role model in so many ways and an example for the nation. But one thing they can also be an example for the nation is when you elect people who care about governing, and you elect people who actually want to improve people's lives, and they set forward on a mission to do so. It's amazing what can happen. And I've said this before on this show, it's amazing when you do elect people who care about governing, you get good government. And that's the result of what has happened. We've got government that's working for people. We have a state that is one of the most successful in the nation, and that's again a direct result of the people we elect who actually care about seeing results. When you think about what's happened in Washington and how broken the system is there, and you think about just a few short years ago here in this state, we had one of the longest government shutdowns in our state history. We have to get away from this toxic relationship that the parties have with each other in the legislature and in Washington. We have to find ways to work together. We have to find ways to actually compromise. You're not, as you said, going to always be able to get everything you want. But how can we get something done for people in this state to make their lives better? And I think again, there are reasonable Republicans out there who think along those lines, just as there are many good Democrats out there who think along those lines. And getting those people in the room together is important. Unfortunately, what's happened in this modern political age is it's become one sort of perpetual campaign, one just long campaign. People are less interested in governing and more interested in running up the political score and trying to make their opponents look bad, trying to
getting
place
individual publicity for themselves as well.
Right? But it's all part of this game that's played, and unfortunately, governing is not a game. There are real consequences to inaction. There are consequences to bad policies that are passed that impact millions of Minnesotans' lives. We have an opportunity. I was saying this to a legislator earlier today. We have an opportunity when you're elected to a body like the state capitol or elected to Congress in Washington, to actually make an impact in people's lives. And in many cases, millions of people's lives in this state hang in the balance in the sense of what their eventual lives will look like, and their own personal fortunes and their own success depends on a lot of the public policy that's passed at the state capitol here.
And what did the Democrats do? For instance, the minimum wage in this state is going to go up. Well, concomitant to that is the fact that we have a 3.87 unemployment rate.
Right.
People are going to have the chance to earn, and $9.50 an hour is not by any means the lap of luxury, but they're going to have a chance to better themselves, and it's going to get better that way.
Right.
Governor Dayton said we're going to change the tax structure. Fortunately, he had both houses. To do that, they added this fourth level of taxes. The naysayers said all the rich people are going to move from the state. I don't know of one person who has left the state, who's making $1 million a year, and who is being hurt by the little bit more that they're paying in taxes. We had a $2 billion deficit, and we owed the schools really most of that money. That deficit is gone.
Yep.
We now have a huge surplus. Huge being $1 billion, not huge.
Yep.
Well, the Republicans automatically would give that back to the voters.
Yeah. Well, we've had surpluses the last two legislative sessions now, and the reality is there's a lot of great economic news, but there is an undercurrent here, and that is that not all people are feeling the benefits of this improving economy here, and we still have work to do to make sure that all Minnesotans are being able to participate in this improving economy and have a job and can secure their future for their families. And so the DFL recognizes that, and so we can crow about our success, and we should. We've had great success here, but I want to share a story that a CEO, I won't name him, but a CEO shared with me. He made a decision about 1.5 years ago, strictly based on economics. First time he had done that. A community down in Georgia rolled out the red carpet for him to open up a manufacturing plant down there. And they gave him every incentive and tax break under the sun, and so he decided to do that instead of build his manufacturing plant here. And it wasn't but a few short months later, 3 to 4 months later, that they started to run into some serious labor problems and labor shortages. And the one thing he said to me is that, I made this very short-sighted decision based on these tax breaks and incentives, not realizing that in Georgia they don't have as educated of a workforce as we do here in Minnesota. And so what I thought I would be saving by all these tax breaks, I had to invest more in the company down there because there was an uneducated workforce to choose from. And so sometimes businesses can be short-sighted too. And now we don't have companies actually fleeing Minnesota. We have the opposite is true.
We have
people
companies
are coming
back.
here, and the
Yes.
reason they come here is what I've said before, many times before, which is the reason Minnesota has more Fortune 500 companies than any other place per capita than any other place in the country is because people value the quality of life and the investments that this state has made in its people and its communities. We have communities that support growing families, but we have schools that are second to none around the country, that we have an educated workforce, we have a healthy workforce. These are things at the end of the day that help the bottom line for many of these major corporations and even the small businesses. So, if we want to be honest about things, our economic competitiveness in a global marketplace, we're in a great position. It's not just about the numbers we talked about, but it's really because we've made, as a state, we've made the conscious decision to invest in people, the conscious decision to invest in education, to invest in our future and our communities. Those investments pay off not just for the people who are living here, but frankly for the businesses who come here to succeed as well.
And when you see some of the national polls, where is the best place to live, where is the best place to work, you live in Eagan, where is one of the best cities
Right.
in the country to live, and we both live in Eagan, constantly. It's Minnesota, Eagan,
Right.
Prairie, someplace like that. That makes a difference, and people do pay attention to that. And the people who live here don't flee someplace else.
Yeah.
The
But it's not-
quality of
yeah.
life, other than a little cool, is really outstanding.
It's not by accident, though, and it's not that this just happened. I think that Minnesotans made a very deliberate decision in the 60s and 70s to start investing in education and making education the cornerstone of what made our state great. But they also made investments in their communities, recognizing that all communities throughout the state, not just those here in the metro area and the suburban area, but all communities in our state deserve a chance to succeed as well. And local government aid is a part of a big part of our formula for success, but also making sure that we have community colleges located throughout the state, and great university system that provides quality education to people who want to go on to higher ed. A K-12 system, again, that is second to none. We've made those decisions.
Even the preschool that
Well,
we
of
have
course.
implemented now, which
Yeah.
is so important.
That's right.
That has come to recognize, whether it's through Art Rolnick or somebody else, showing statistically that important preschool really makes for better students.
Yep.
And we've implemented those things.
That's right.
And it bothers me, for instance, that the naysayers will say, MNsure is going to fall on its face. Has MNsure fallen on
right.
its face?
I mean, look, 95% of Minnesotans have health insurance now, thanks to MNsure. We have the lowest health premiums in the nation. It's working. At the end of the day, you can say there were some problems when it was rolled out with the website, and everyone acknowledges some of those issues.
But these are new ventures that are going to have problems.
That's-
Social Security had
That's
problems
exactly
when it was
that's
rolled out.
exactly right.
Medicare had
Right.
problems
That's
when
right.
it was rolled
I mean,
out.
the one of President Obama's great legacies will be the fact that he, in the end, history will treat him very kindly on passing the Affordable Care Act, because it took a giant step forward in making sure that people who didn't have health insurance now have health insurance, making sure that people who had pre-existing conditions who before were kicked off of their health insurance can stay on, making sure that young people can stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26. Providing some stability in the health market in terms of premiums. All of these things in the end have taken us from being one of the worst health care countries in the nation to a few steps beyond. And now we are on a path towards universal health care. We're on a path for making sure that not one single person in this nation is going without health care. And that's
Which is
really
such a no-brainer.
It is
If
a
you look at
no-brainer.
the other industrialized countries and you realize that one of the reasons that they are flourishing in most instances is because education-wise, in many places, you don't have to pay for your education, which is still something to be tackled here. Health-wise, you can get your health care.
right.
You would think that it's not an ideological thing. You would think that it's a conscience thing.
You would, but again, I think there are people, frankly, in both parties, who are driven by their ideology more so than trying to figure out a way to govern in the best interest of people. And sometimes that ideology gets in the way of progress, and making real substantive change in this country requires people working together. And given how polarized our politics are now, both at the federal and state level, the only way things are going to get done is for both parties to come together in a meaningful way. And I'm hopeful. Again, I'm optimistic the direction of our state. I think things are going well here, but it's going to require a continued commitment by leaders at all levels of government, but also leaders in a community and other public leaders to come together in a real way and continue to be imaginative and hopeful and forward-looking about how we can tackle some of these problems.
Two things in that regard. You were such a rational and soft-spoken person as we sit here, and yet you're referred to as the attack dog of the Democratic Party. The fact of the matter is that you put yourself on the line. You don't put your candidates on the line. You go out front. When it's somebody who has to make a statement, it's you,
Right.
not your candidate. And when something has to be written, either positively or in response to something, you're not hesitant to do that.
Well,
And
look,
I think
yeah.
that's a great leadership
I
role.
really believe that my job is to help get out the message. And it's also to make sure that any attack on our candidates and our values as a party doesn't go unanswered. We need to be aggressive in messaging as Democrats, which I think, frankly, for many years, Democrats haven't been good messengers. And I think oftentimes people tend to be a little bit too nice. You know, the other side for years has been taking off the gloves and just hammering us in the head and punching us in the head, and we haven't been punching back.
And they have unlimited money
Right.
available to them,
Right.
which is so detrimental. Citizens United,
Correct.
This business about corporations being individuals, which is such garbage, but it
Yeah.
makes the job even more difficult. So what can we do between now and 2016
Well, look,
to
you know,
get
there's-
out the
there's a
vote
lot.
and get people really involved?
There's a lot. I mean, look, here's one thing I would say. This is important. The 2014 election, we should do all the analysis we should and write it all down and learn from our mistakes. No doubt there were mistakes made. Learn from our successes. We should then wrap it up, put a bow on it, and say open in January of 17. Because the 2014 election is going to be radically different than the 2016 election in terms of the composition of the electorate. We know that in a presidential year that we have an increase in our turnout, right? And we know that people just naturally are going to be mobilized, energized, and organized for that election.
We have to energize young people, though.
We do.
It's
but
their
you-
future,
we do,
and they're not
but,
voting.
Yeah, and think about this, that in 2012 you had 19% of 18 to 29-year-olds vote. In 2014 you had 13%. So there was a 6% drop. Over 14 million young people nationwide didn't vote compared to 2012. So we have to do that. There's no doubt about it. But what we need to do for 16 is we need to make sure that over the course of the next 2 years in the legislature that we do good things to help people, that the governor continues to push for a middle-class agenda that helps all working people in this state, and that we help all corners of this state, not at the expense of one area or the other. If we do that, I think we'll win. But we do have some tools in our toolbox now that can help us expand the electorate through voter registration, but also, frankly, through the no-excuse absentee balloting and the early voting period. We need to be much more aggressive as DFLers of making sure that people are registered to vote, that they know that the election's coming up, that we expand the electorate and we get them energized and
And
mobilized.
they have to understand that that one vote does count.
Yes.
That one vote does make a difference. I think that many young people were discouraged in that regard, figuring, with all these millions coming in, what does my vote mean?
Right.
Your vote with other votes and energy can make the difference. And the future is theirs. The future is not mine, it's not yours even. The future is theirs. So
right.
it's always an education to talk to Ken Martin.
Thank you so much for
And,
having me, Alan. Appreciate it.
Really, just keep the work up and keep doing